Namaste and greetings. I, Remat, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav, Evam, Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on the Environment and Union Budget 2024 to 25. This deliberation is part of IMPRI's 5th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget 2024 to 25, which is a series of panel discussions on crucial key policy issues and Union Budget involving more than 100 thematic distinguished experts and research team members. This discussion is organized by the Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. As part of IMPRI hashtag Web Policy Talk series, the State of Environment hashtag Planet Talks. Now let me introduce the esteemed gathering. Our chair for the session is Mr. Ashish Kothari ji, founder member of Indian Environmental Group, Kalpavriksh, visiting senior fellow IMPRI. We welcome, sir. Today's deliberation comprises of an excellent distinguished panel of experts who will be sharing their expertise, which includes Professor Krishna Raj ji, visiting professor IMPRI, Professor Center for Economic Studies and Policy Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, India. Mr. Soumya Datta ji, co-convener of South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis in New Delhi. Professor Shyamala Mani ji, Senior Advisor, Wash and Waste Management, CEH, Public Health Foundation of India, former Professor, National Institute of Urban Affairs, New Delhi, visiting Professor IMPRI. Mr. Debaditya Sinha ji, Lead Climate and Ecosystem, Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, New Delhi. Ms. Bhavreen Kandhari ji, Founder, Warrior Moms. Ms. Aparna Roy ji, Fellow and Lead, Climate Change and Energy at the Center for New Economic Diplomacy, Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi. Ms. Prathna Bora ji, Independent Advisor to Environmental Startups. Ms. Gopalika Arora ji, Associate Fellow, Center for Economy and Growth, Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi. And Mr. Himanshu Shekhar ji, Senior Editor, Political and Current Affairs, New Delhi Television Limited, NDTV, visiting Senior Fellow IMPRI. We are extremely grateful to have such a distinguished panel of experts joining us today. Proceeding further, I welcome all the participants to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and effort into understanding the nuances of gender and social inclusion within the Union Budget, while helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants to this course for impactful discussion. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. We will start with a brief presentation presented by Geetam. Over to you.
We are not able to hear you, Geetam. Check your mic. Now, yes. No. Geetam, not.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, Geetam, go ahead.
Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead. Geetam, we can hear you now. Go.
Hello.
Geetam, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Am I audible now?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, Geetam, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Now?
Yes.
Am I audible now?
Yes, Geetam, you're audible.
Okay, so I'll start from the beginning. Greetings, everyone. I, Geetam Acharya, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to take this forward for the brief presentation on environment and the Union Budget 2024 and 25 that our team has prepared, covering the key highlights. Now, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman listed 9 priorities for the government's latest budget: climate and energy, where 2 priorities of particular interest with respect to environment. First priority, productivity and resilience in agriculture, which included some measures to improve farming and farmer welfare, including the development of climate resilient crops. 10,000 need-based bioresource centers will be established, or the crop insurance scheme, which becomes crucial for farmers in this time of climate change. The latest budget had allocated rupees 14,600 crores, up from rupees 13,625 crores from the last year's estimates. The sixth priority, energy security. The latest budget is allocated rupees 2,228 crores for nuclear power projects across the country, a rise from the budget estimates of rupees 442 crores in 23-24. Moving on to the next slide. Uh, Here are some budget estimates of allocation to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and the Ministry of New and Renewable Resource Energy from the year 2022-23 to 2024-25, where we can observe a clear increase in the allocation with 3,330 crore and 19,100 crores respectively. Moreover, the scheme for faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles in India, which was launched to increase electric and hybrid centers purchased by increasing financial support, however, saw a decrease in terms of allocation from rupees 5,172 crores in 2023-24 to rupees 2,671 crores in 2024-25. Moving on to the next slide. We'll be looking at the trends in schemes and domains under the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Environment and climate being part of the 9 listed priorities, energy and climate being part of the 9 listed priorities reflects an overall increase in the allocation to the various domains and schemes under these 2 ministries. For instance, the National Green Hydrogen Mission, which is a provision to make India a global hub for production, usage, and export of green hydrogen and its derivatives, and to achieve the aim of being self-sufficient through clean energy, has also seen a relatively higher increase from its previous year's allocation. Moving on to the next slide. We can see developing green energy towards meeting the commitment of net zero by 2070. The following measures were announced. A viability gap funding will be provided by harnessing offshore wind energy potential for the initial capacity of 1 gigawatt. Secondly, coal gasification and liquefaction capacity of 1 MT will be set up by 2030. This will help in reducing imports of natural gas, methanol, and ammonia. Thirdly, phased mandatory blending of compressed biogas in compressed natural gas for transport and piped natural gas for domestic purposes will be mandated. Lastly, financial assistance will be provided for the procurement of biomass aggregation machinery to support collection. Moving on, uh, environmental education and awareness. In terms of environmental education and awareness, the budget has revamped the decision support system for environmental awareness, policy, planning, and outcome evaluation scheme. Now named Environment Education, Awareness, Research, and Skill Development, these initiatives aim to increase environmental education through exhibitions and training programs, research and development. A corpus of 1 lakh crore has been established for financial long-term research and innovation in sunrise domain, including environmental technologies and sustainable practices. The budget also discussed climate resilience and blue economy. In line with this, a scheme for restoration, adaptation, coastal aquaculture, and mariculture with a multi-sectoral approach will be launched. The concept of blue economy 2.0 is interconnected with the blue revolution, which focuses on the productivity of the fisheries sector. The budget estimates for the blue revolution has been increased to rupees 2,352 crores in 2024-25 from rupees 1,500 crores in 23-24. With that, I'd like to wrap this up in a small introduction on the budget from the environmental perspective. Over to you, Ashish sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay,
can-
if audio is not so good, just let me know so that I can switch off my video and yeah.
Yes, yes, sir. That will help. Please switch off the video.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Geetam. Okay. Thanks, Geetam, for that introduction to the environmental aspects of the budget. Thanks to Rahmat also for the introduction, and Arjun and your entire team at IMPRI for yet another wonderful occasion to analyze the budget. I think you've been doing this for the last few years, and it's a very, very important service that you're providing. So thinking about 3 or 4 of the panelists, hopefully they will join. A couple of them are not well, so perhaps they may not be able to. Soumya sent a message saying that he's in some coastal part, so his connection may not be good. And a couple of others have said that they're not well. So, and Himanshu, I think you said was going to join later. So let's start with the 4 wonderful people we do have. Before that, I just want to give a few introductory remarks from my understanding of a very quick glance at the budget and the budget speech. Now, one of the things I normally do looking at the budget speech of the finance minister is a very quick count of how many times words like environment, wildlife, forest, biodiversity, pollution figure. And so this time around, it's not significantly better than in previous budgets. Environment, for instance, gets mentioned only a couple of times, once in the context of the energy transition and once in the context of how PVC flex banners import will not be subsidized because they are environmentally damaging. And then a third time in exempting the environmental cess from for excisable goods which are in stock. That's the only 3 occasions where environment is mentioned. Wildlife, interestingly, is mentioned once, and that in the context only of the special provisions to Odisha. As we know, Odisha and Andhra Pradesh, for rather obvious political reasons, have been specially given provisions in this budget. Forest, 0 mentions. Biodiversity or biological diversity, 0 mentions. Pollution is mentioned only once, and that also to justify river linking, which is apparently going to help reduce water pollution in rivers. No mention of air pollution, etc. So that's with regard to the finance minister's speech. Now, of course, that's a slightly superficial way of looking at it. One needs to try and look at a lot of the other aspects in the speech also. With regard to the budget itself, I found, as I think also Geetam has provided us, some what seem to be positive aspects, such as a scheme for benefiting 1 crore or for helping 1 crore farmers to switch to natural farming. Now, this is something that's been mentioned, I think, in the last couple of budgets also. What we don't know is how this is actually working on the ground, which is very important to analyze. Then also 1 crore households to be given subsidies for solar rooftop so that they can get free energy. It sounds very good, but as some energy analysts have analyzed, the financial outlays for that and the bureaucracy involved in getting those subsidies is very problematic. Now, and then there are some other similar aspects, for instance, the significant increase in solar in general. But we know that while this may sound good and on the ground may also be good in some places, it also means a significant increase in mega solar projects. And some of us are currently helping with campaigns, for instance, against a mega solar project up in Changthang in Ladakh, which is going to be extremely ecologically and socially damaging. Another one in the wetlands of Kutch, which will also be very damaging for birds and for local pastoral communities. And of course, across the country, many others, both for solar and for wind. So this significant increase in solar also needs to be analyzed from multiple perspectives. Then there is a big push for nuclear. Now, nuclear, as we know, is extremely controversial. Supposedly the cleanest source of energy. That is what the economic survey also says. But that is, of course, that has to be contested. And we've also had, of course, promises for big nuclear expansion in several previous budgets and finance minister speeches, but not much significant additional capacity has actually been added. So there's also serious financial issues. Now, with regard to the blue revolution, which Geeta mentioned, to me, actually, that's a sign of alarm. because it is fairly similar to what we saw with the Green Revolution in the 1960s onwards, which was a serious increase in productivity, but at the cost of both short-term and long-term ecological sustainability of the soil, of seeds, of small-scale farmers, and so on. And we're seeing the same with marine, because, for instance, while the Blue Revolution investments are increasing, there's also significant increase in investments for marine exports. Now, the Indian Ocean is already struggling with overexploitation, as are all the oceans of the world. So what does this mean from the point of view of marine biodiversity is again to be seriously examined. A serious drop in the allocations, not a drop, sorry, stagnant allocations to the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Now, we have seen that where states have actually been innovative with the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, it has been very beneficial, not just for people, which is very important, but also for the environment in terms of regenerating lands, creating water bodies and things like that. So this government, possibly again for political reasons, has over the last few years actually reduced or kept the Manrega allocation stagnant, which is very problematic. Climate adaptation, I did not see that specifically in the budget. It could be hidden under various other allocations. But this is also something, and perhaps there are 3 or 4 people on the panel who are going to speak about climate, and they can comment on this. Last couple of points, and then I'll hand it over to our panelists. I had examined the budget last year in terms of the relative allocations of the National Highways Authority and the Ministry of Environment. And it more or less remains the same, which is that the National Highways Authority alone gets 60 times the budget of the entire Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, 60 times. So I think we can see the priorities here. And if you look at the list of major schemes, the Finance Minister has listed about 140 major schemes. There's none on environment, climate, wildlife, forests. Okay, this is not necessarily an in-depth view of the budget. That's what we're going to get from our panelists, but I just wanted to open with some of these remarks, and we will be getting a lot more in-depth understanding from our 7-8 panelists. So let me start with Devaditya, because I think he has to leave. So Devaditya, over to you. I think you're going to be focusing on the conservation aspects of the budget.
Yes.
Please go ahead. All panelists, please remember 5 minutes, perhaps 6, because we may not have a couple of panelists, but maximum. And I will, I don't know, I'll open my video. If you see my video open, that means you're already over time or reaching your time limit. This is to also enable us to have a nice round of question and answer with the audience. And then we'll also come back to you with some additional questions that I or others from the audience might have. So you'll get further chances during the rest of the session also. But opening remarks about 5, maximum 6 minutes. Thanks. Devaditya, go ahead.
Thanks, Ashish, and thanks, IMPRI, for organizing this. So, I will just start by saying that, we already had one discussion this year when this interim budget was presented. And I think this budget is not a significant departure from the previous budget. But I will just put some of my observations, and I leave it up to the audience to interpret whatever they wanted. So, budget, if you ask me, so there are 2-3 things which I can, as a researcher, I get the information. First is that what is the amount allocated to each heads. Now, this is also dependent on the priority of the government and also sometimes based on the revised estimate. Revised estimate is something which previously the government has approved the budget, but they couldn't spend or they overspent. This also comes in the budget document. So you can see that the column called revised estimate. So that gives you a picture, how much the departments have been able to spend. And that gives you some hint about, the areas where the government is more focused or the ministry is more focused on. So one thing I want to say about this is that the focus is clearly on infrastructure and tourism. And I think it reflects the priority of the government. So even in the budget of the environment, Minister of Environment, it also talks more about, in fact, Ashish, you mentioned the only place where wildlife is mentioned is in the context of tourism. So clearly the message is that anything which can boost the GDP numbers or something like that, that is there. But I don't see a very clear vision or any focus on conservation of species or ecosystem. In fact, in the speech, in the last budget, there was so many times the minister mentioned green and other things, but now this year only very I might have mentioned all this thing, but the focus has been mainly on this infrastructure development and tourism. Now, interestingly, if you see, there has been significant, I won't say significant, but yes, there has been good amount of increase in the financial allocation for the secretariat and the institution, the equity institutions, like Zoological Survey of India. And if you see NTCA, the budget has gone very high, I assume because of the cheetah project, it is like that. But if you see some institutions, their budget has also reduced. For example, ICFRE. So if you see the revised estimate, it was 483 crores for the last year, but this year, despite of that, the budget is 300 crores, and I assume it is linked with the green credit program. So that is just only assumption, and there are some linkage with those kind of things, by ICFRE is now maybe they are asked to raise their own funds to this kind of government schemes. Now, in the entire budget, as I mentioned, if you see the institutions and the regulatory body, CPCBs, for example, their budget has increased. But if you see the column for this expenditure on development of wildlife habitats, and if you see that last year the approved budget was some 758 crores. Out of that, project elephant and other things, which it includes all the development of wildlife habitats and anything, project tiger, project elephant, all these things are there. So last year the budget approved was 491 crores, but this year and revised budget was 350 crores. That means they couldn't spend the entire money which was allocated to them. And this year the budget has reduced for the conservation work. So if you see the actual conservation work, and there is also one row for conservation of natural resource and ecosystem. If you see the spending on biodiversity conservation, it was hardly 7 crores approved last year, and they couldn't spend even half the money. Only 3.5 crores were spent on biodiversity conservation. And and conservation natural ecosystem was 25 crores out of 47 crores. So it itself shows that, the real work, I think MFCC, why it exists, is one of the mandate is the protection of wildlife and forest. In that, we are spending hardly 20 crores or something like that, odd numbers, even 3.5 crores on biodiversity conservation, on biodiversity conservation. So, the real conservation issues are lost somewhere, and there has been increased focus on the infrastructure. So I think this is something we really need to go into detail. Important thing I want to mention here, because there's nothing I could comment more beyond that, is that, budget also makes a way for the policies. So, whatever the amount of money or whatever budget is allocated, so policies will follow, and then it will take into shape, it will see the influence on the laws and everything. So I think in environmental issue matters, there should be some kind of mechanism where at least the concerns are taken into account before the budget. I think a couple of years ago I mentioned about strategic impact assessment, like before we design any big plans or big projects. So we should always have some strategic assessment of the project, how it impacts the biodiversity or the people's livelihood on ground. But it happens otherwise. We first, create a fait accompli constitution by saying this amount of crores are allocated to this thing, this is that, and then we have to work with that. So I think going forward, I see very less for anything for species conservation, anything, and the focus is clearly on developing more infrastructure and just to keep the GDP numbers going. I think that's all from my side.
Thanks, Devaditya. Very interesting points. I have a couple of questions which I'll come back to you in a few minutes. And thanks for keeping the time. Wonderful. Over to Professor Krishna Raj. I think you'll be focusing on the gap between climate policy and climate finance. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ashish ji and Dr. Arjun and co-panelists. Thank you for inviting me to this IMPRI discussion on the environment and union budget. So I'll be focusing on the policy issues concerning the gap between financing climate change and and also the actual implementation of the policies, the gap. If I understand the budget basically gives an developmental agenda for the government for the next 1 year, in which how the government wants to pursue the developmental needs of the various regions, various sectors, and various socioeconomic group. So if I understand from the this year's 2024-25 budget, the overemphasis has been given on the achieve developmental goals, particularly development of India as a developed country by 2047. This is the major agenda of the government. Or we can understand it wants to achieve $40 trillion economy by 2047. So I have been dealing with the union budget for quite some time, and I'm tracking the budgetary allocations for various sectors and regions, and also the social sector. I focus on climate change. If you look at the climate change, even though it's a global concern and needs global cooperative and collective action, but ultimately countries like China and India, even USA, they need to play an important role, because their per capita emissions of CO2 is increasing day by day. So if you look at the Indian context, India wants to realize twin goals simultaneously. One is developed country by 2047. On the other hand, it wants to achieve net zero emission by 2070. So even though there is a trade-off between these two, but there is always a opportunity and challenge that can be met by the decisive decision of the government that can make the development more sustainable one. If you look at the Union Budget 2024-25, it places high priority on development rather than environment, I can say. So climate action, certainly it requires a big budget, but the budget allocated for this sector, including environment, energy, and other sector, social sector, agriculture sector, etc., it is not incommensurate with, as Ashish just now mentioned, the transportation sector has received more than 60% of the priority than the environment.
60 times.
So 60
times the environment.
60 times, yeah, 60 times, yes. So in my recent comment on the budget, I explained that the economic survey presented day before the budget was presented, that both the we can understand from the budget as well as economic survey that it has a distinct outlook. Economic survey has a distinct outlook in terms of reality and expectations. For the first time in the last 10 years, the government of India, present government, has showed the courage to accept the economic reality and the environmental reality of India. An awful level of income and wealth inequality, which is taking place for the last several decades, and youth unemployment and persistent inflation that is affecting not only the economy, but more importantly, environment, and the enormous climate risks that threatens India's growth potential. So these are the four issues, at least the government has now come to an understanding that these are the issues they need to deal with. So the finance minister, in order to try to reduce the income inequality, they tried some extent in a timid way to reduce the income inequality, slightly tweaking the income tax structure. However, the new tax structure may not help the middle class. So if you come to the ecological footprints, the rich they are producing The government should have introduced the green wealth tax, reintroduce the wealth tax under the name of green wealth tax to reduce the corporations and affluent people. They are consuming more ecological goods and services that would have helped reducing the ecological footprints. So this approach might have achieved three goals continuously: reducing income inequality on the one hand, garnering revenue for exchequer, and also addressing climate change by reducing the ecological footprints of the rich people. So in this regard, the government...
Professor, you'll have to wind up, please.
Yeah.
Just take a few seconds more here.
Yeah. So India's has committed achieve net zero emission and lifestyle changes and also reduce emission intensity by its GDP by 45% by 2030. But if you look at the budgetary allocation, the Ministry of Environment has received 3,330 crores, which is 93.25 crores addition to last year budget. But most importantly, this budget is for revenue expenditure rather than capital expenditure. Even though there are programs like National Mission for Green India and National Mission for National Afforestation programs are there, but in order to achieve 33% of the area under area under forest of the Indian geographical area, we can't achieve this type of a small budget. However, the energy sector has received 19,000 plus crores, which clearly
Krishna Raj, sorry, energy, I think Soumya will comment on. Can you please wind up, because you've already taken about 8-9 minutes.
Yeah, in this regard, what the government is placing its agenda on development is completely ignoring the environment, and that also can be understood from the state action plan, and climate change is not receiving any fund for the from the government. I just stop here and I'll come back. Thank you.
Thank you. You'll get another chance. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. Just a quick comment also that you mentioned about no green wealth tax. It's very interesting because the Prime Minister's acronym LIFE keeps getting mentioned everywhere, which is lifestyles for the environment, but doesn't seem to percolate down into actual budgetary allocations. Soumya has joined us. Soumya, can you hear us?
Yes,
wherever
I can
you
hear
are
you.
in some part of India's coast. Okay, welcome. Can you go ahead and take your 5-6 minutes? I think you're going to focus on climate and energy, right? Please go ahead.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, good evening, everyone. So let me be focused on this energy and climate change issue with this interconnections and interface. But before that, just one short comment that every year that we see the budget being presented, the budget is about 0.07%, 0.079%, 0.069%. So first of all, India's budget and India's policies don't have environment as any of its priorities, not even a priority, but not even in the second or third tier. In fact, one of the lowest importance, though there are a lot of utterances by the ministers and prime ministers. While I say that, and the next, let me talk about the energy issue and the climate. See, there are different, not only in the Ministry of Environment's budget, but budget of different ministries also reflect how this transition, energy transition, which the government of India is tom-tomming all across the world, in every COP, every international meeting, they're talking about energy transition. So one good thing in this budget is, okay, partly good thing, is that the allocation for new and renewable energy ministry has been increased, and it's reasonable for this time frame. It's around 19,100 something crore. But if you look at the government's stated goal of achieving 500 gigawatt of renewable energy, non-fossil energy installed by 2030, we are talking about 2024 middle, and 2030 is not far off. So then this kind of allocation and this kind of prioritization is going nowhere in that direction of what the Government of India is internationally committed, and it has also internally committed and transmitted that we had to go for 500 gigawatt of non-fossil installed capacity. So that's one thing. Second is one other good thing, though there are two sides of that. The worst climate offender in terms of energy resource is coal. All of us know that. And coal is India's primary energy source. Even in India's NDC says coal is our primary, coal will remain our primary energy source. And in the last three COPs, the negotiations, the climate negotiation, even CCC COPs, we have seen that China, India, and a few other countries have very strongly opposed any mention of phasing out fossil fuels, even phasing out unabated fossil fuels. So they have strongly opposed this. Only in the last COP in Dubai, as a strategic move, India proposed phasing out all fossil fuels, knowing that nobody is going to take up. But in any case, India's action do not translate onto that. But one good thing that I was saying, the Ministry of Coal, if you look at this year's budget, this year they have been allocated a very measly amount, 190 crores or less than 200 crores. Of course, the entire allocation of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is 330 crores, 330 crores. So that's also not a big amount. But coal has received very little allocation. Of course, the government policies have shifted because more and more private coal mining is being encouraged. That's how also the very little allocation for the Ministry of Coal will actually not affect too much of coal production. Because otherwise, if you look at the other stated goal that Government of India has announced, that we have to go for 1 billion tons of coal production. I think that target was 24-25. So even if the coal ministry has got a little less allocation, it's not going to affect too much the primary source of greenhouse gases, that is coal, that India extracts and burns. The other aspect that in climate change that I want to connect it with energy, I have to say, and Ashish also mentioned about LIFE. For the last 2 years, this LIFE scheme is being tom-tom. But if you look at other energy intensive sectors like transportation, the entire focus is on very high energy intensive, very high emission intensive transportation, which is aviation. Government of India is encouraging flights, airports, new airlines, new connections, new air connectivities, and that is actually going to increase the total amount of carbon emissions, the climate damaging emissions, very, very highly. Because for any kind of short and medium haul distance, taking a flight causes around 7 to 9 times as much emission as you do if you travel by a train. So if you look at the environment and energy, it's not only energy in terms of electricity, all the other sectors of energy are also going in directions which are completely counter to any stated climate goal. So on the one hand, we see Government of India is propagating renewable energy. They have taken joint leadership, International Solar Alliance with France, and they have brought together many countries into the ISA. On the other hand, every action, every policy that you see on energy sectors, again, I'll remind, energy is not just electricity. Energy is coal, energy is in transportation, energy in every other sector. So if you look at what other sectors are reflecting the policies of, they are all going in the same direction, which we are copying from what the northern countries, the countries of the north has done for long. China also has done. So we are going into more and more energy intensive, emission intensive modes of use, whether it is industry or it is in transportation. So that's another negative in the climate change. The last point that I would like to mention is that though it is not directly with energy, but access to energy and climate adaptation, these are very clearly connected. And adaptation is one thing that has absolutely no connection in the budget, apart from a few words mentioned. They have mentioned about these disasters, the natural disasters, quote unquote natural disasters, which are not really natural. But beyond that, the slow onset disaster that is increasing, Lot of areas are going under the salinity, sea level rise, loss of productivity and yield due to higher nighttime temperatures. Year after year after year, you see huge number of heat wave days, large number of people losing their livelihood because of heat waves and heat indexes, the combination of very high temperature and high humidity. All of these areas, also the adaptation of this requires these groups to be provided energy and provide other kind of adaptation measures. Just as an example, because this might look a little odd, like say there are 30 to 40 crore people who work in this kind of heat waves and heat indexes outdoor, who have to work outdoors. There are 3 to 4 crore street vendors. There are 2 to 3 crore rickshaw pullers, about 7 crores or more construction workers. There are porters and others, apart from small and marginal farmers and agricultural workers. All of these people are getting hit by the heat waves and heat indexes, and people are dying in large numbers. If you have to do adaptation measures, you have to put both energy and other means. Like for a heat index, you need to put an emergency cooling system, you need to put monitoring and then cooling systems in every such place where in urban areas or rural areas, this kind of workers are exposed to extreme heat and humidity, and they have to work outside. In those areas, there is absolutely no action from the budget. I'll end up on this. There is absolutely no action from the budget. So we'd like to see in coming budget, though there's very little hope about this, in the coming budget, forget about all else, far more action on the adaptation side, because that's where roughly 40 to 50 crores of Indians, poorest Indians, are suffering the most from climate impacts. And their energy will play a big role along with that knowledge and organization. So I'll end by the end in that. If there are questions, I'll be happy to take it.
Thank you, Shyamala. I think what's very interesting in both what you and Krishna Raj said were missing elements in the budget, but how that is a mismatch to a very, very large section on climate, including climate adaptation in the economic survey. So they've said a lot of things there, but then it's not reflected anywhere in the budgets. Let me go to Gopalika. Gopalika, you're there? Yes. I think you're going to help us to understand the climate and agriculture aspects of the budget. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Kothari. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to switch off my camera because I'm experiencing some lags. Firstly, I would like to thank IMPRI for organizing such a timely discussion. And in the interest of time, I would limit my interventions to two major climate sectors, which I think this year's budget also did, starting with agriculture. Boosting productivity and pushing for climate smart agriculture was one of the top priorities this year, and quite a few measures were announced to back natural farming, climate resilient crops, and also digital infrastructure for agriculture. And of course, there were some hits, but there were also some missed opportunities, and I'll start with those. Well, the announcements actually talked a big game about revolutionizing agricultural research. The actual funding did not quite match that enthusiasm, because the funding for agriculture research that comes from Department of Agriculture Research and Education got close to 99 billion. That might sound like a lot, but it was just a tiny bump from last year's 98 billion rupees. And when we consider the ambitious goals that were laid out, like developing climate resilient crops, it is clear that we need way more investments to conduct climate risk and vulnerability assessments and other R&D activities for climate smart agriculture. It was also a bit surprising that this year's budget seems to have overlooked the agrarian rural economy, which actually employs the largest chunk of our working population. And like Mr. Kothari also mentioned, the funding for schemes like Narega remains stagnant, and this could really throw a wrench in our climate adaptation efforts, because while the scheme is mostly about providing employment, but a big part of what it does is also related to managing natural resources and reducing climate vulnerabilities by improving soil quality or increasing tree cover. So this scheme has always been very crucial, not just for job security, but also for helping communities adapt to climate change. Another issue that I was really hoping the budget could address was compensation for crop losses. because last year alone, India saw post-harvest losses of around 900 billion. And the economic survey also pointed out how crucial it is to improve post-harvest infrastructure like cold chain facilities and to also develop the food processing sector to cut down some of these losses and extend the shelf life of the produce. We do have something called the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, which was announced, I think, back in 2020. But looking at the budget, this year's budget allocation for this particular scheme, not only there is a shortfall of funds, but if you look at the last year's budget documents, you'll see that the funds allocated to this scheme are being used or redirected to other purposes instead of being used exclusively for agriculture infrastructure. And on top of that, there was also a noticeable drop in funding for crop insurance, which is very worrying because this budget cut may leave the farmers more vulnerable to the effects of extreme weather events. There were also several positives that I would like to highlight. The renewed emphasis on the sugar industry could actually significantly help the country achieve its ambitious target of ethanol blending. And there's a scheme that is there, which is designed to provide financial assistance to sugar mills for enhancing and augmenting ethanol production. And there was a decent amount was allocated under this particular scheme. The government also plans to engage experts to create a roadmap for Indian agriculture. And this is a welcome step as it would make the policy making more robust and grounded, hopefully bringing in the much needed transparency. Another thing that was highlighted was the importance of credible digital data was re-emphasized, including the expansion of digital crop survey and digitization of land and other details of farmers. In fact, the Agriculture Ministry is already developing tools like the Unified Portal for Agriculture Statistics to improve access to timely data and analytics for Indian agriculture. And this is a very positive step. And if the scope of digitalization is further expanded, it can significantly aid in delivering region-specific data and information and also simultaneously promote precision farming. I will now next talk about energy. My co-panelist has already covered most of it, but I would also like to highlight certain things. Energy transition has always been a big focus in budget announcements, and this year was no different. Energy security was one of the 9 priority areas that was highlighted in the budget. But what stood out this time is a clear focus on energy storage and nuclear energy. And this shift, I think, somehow suggests that India's energy transition is moving beyond just increasing the renewable capacity to also ensure that that these sources can actually meet the country's energy demands. Because despite renewable energy making up to, I think, 45% of our installed capacity, it only contributes to about 25% of the total electricity generation. And this is where nuclear energy comes in, and as it can replace the coal-based thermal power as a reliable source of baseload power, especially when solar or wind energy isn't available. So that's the positive aspect. But the budget announcement in this area was mostly related to development of small nuclear reactors in partnership with the private sector. But the expertise, this technology is mostly concentrated in China and Russia. And the budget somehow indicates that these technologies will be developed locally and will not be imported. And while this sounds promising, but I think we should not forget that a similar announcement was also made in the year 2007 for the development of 10 traditional reactors, and none of those are operational yet. So the viability of these projects is still in question, and we will need strong support from the private sector to succeed. Overall, I think the budget's focus has remained limited to certain sectors, and key areas like sustainable mobility, clean hydrogen and wind sector got no attention, which is surprising because electric vehicles which was one of the key priorities for the government, was notably absent from the budget speech. Many of us were actually expecting an announcement about the next phase of the FAME scheme, as the current scheme is going to end this year. But the budget speech did not mention FAME at all. That said, there was a decent allocation for FAME in the budget, but that was much lower than the last year's estimates. And on the other hand, there was a massive increase in allocation for the PLI schemes on automobiles and components and for battery storage. So all of this combined with easing of custom duties on lithium and other critical minerals for EVs, it seems that there's a strong focus on the supply side of EVs now, which is in quite contrast to the FAME scheme, which has focused on demand side subsidies. I think I'm going to stop here and continue in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopalika. Thanks a lot for that. I have some questions for you also, but I'll come back to them. I think IMPRI people might correct me if I'm wrong, that we don't have Aparna, Bhavreen, and Prarthana. Is that correct? Am I right on that?
Yeah, Bhavreen ji was here. I will just check with her.
Okay. So
Shyamala ji is here.
yeah, I know that Shyamala ji and Himanshu are here. I was going to take a break at this point and get into a few questions, but if there's only two other speakers, I think we'll finish with the round of panelists and then enter the question phase. So if that's okay, then I'll proceed. Shyamala ji, please go ahead. Perhaps your focus will be on some of the environment and health aspects, but please go ahead with whatever your main focus areas are. Yes, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, IMPRI. As it is obvious, I have been involved with water and sanitation and waste management, and of course, health. The finance minister in her budget definitely said that they are going to improve and promote water supply, sewage treatment, and solid waste management projects and services through bankable projects in about 100 cities. Now, first of all, I checked, and there has been no enhancement in the budget for the Swachh Bharat mission. And like one of the MPs pointed out in the parliament, things are still in bad shape as far as waste management and sewage and sanitation in both urban and rural areas go. So I was a bit surprised as to how the finance minister was saying that, she's going to achieve all these three things. But despite the fact, and also the fact that she's focusing a little more only on the 100 cities, large cities in partnership with state governments. Now, talking about bankable projects, what we have been noticing is that even projects which are to do with better waste management or sewage or sanitation, there is a lot of viability gap, especially because there are many areas in water, sanitation, and waste management where a lot of it is not really covering the entire cost, and there's always a very big gap because of collection problems and issues, and that is really making many startups and many big companies in this area go away. And how much ever the state government tries to come in, it is really not sufficient, because they announced last year, even through that 15th Finance Commission, there is going to be challenge, that is performance-based challenge fund for 8,000 crores to the states, and that as an incubation, and even that has not been implemented as yet. They have not even selected the states. And what the other thing that we are finding is also that, even the UIDF that was announced last year, that has also not gone forward. We were quite, we were quite happy to know that, we were thinking that from the 10,000 crores to the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, it will go up further, because it meant a lot of a lot of support, especially for people like sanitation workers, whereas that they are experiencing health problems, they are experiencing various types of hazards, even of losing life. And there have been cases even today yeah, in states like even Kerala, where such things are happening. But we find that there is absolutely no enhancement in that kind of a budget. And of course, the finance minister has said that they are going to achieve 100% water tap connection and sewage septage coverage by March 2029, and reuse around 40% of treated used wastewater in the next 5 years. But there is no clear action plan, although they have increased funds for PMAY both in urban and rural sector. But does that have anything to do with infrastructure? Does that have anything to do with how they are going to also achieve water supply, sanitation, and solid waste management? That is not at all clear. And most importantly, urban climate resilience is not even mentioned, and we are experiencing it today, just now, that the whole West Coast and even several other places are literally struggling under the influence of the climate change. And you have rainfall like 1 year's rainfall in one day, and so even you cannot expect municipal corporations or municipalities to make arrangements in such a way that they can remove that kind of water. And drainage has been given absolutely no priority. So even yesterday, there has been a tragedy in Delhi city itself. On the other hand, we find that, it's all highly development oriented, and there is no plan as to how, whether, there could be a possibility that natural drainages, which go towards lakes and, better construction, like, for instance, even if you see the rural Manrega budget, it doesn't have any increase, and there is no enhancement in the budget because that actually gives a possibility of adaptive measures. And, especially digging of lakes and ponds and cleaning of, dry lakes and things like that. So, and, improving natural drainages. In fact, the whole thing is on more development, although it talks about urban planning. But it doesn't really say that what are the issues and problems concerning the urban planning that needs to be, it needs to be changed, and how, something like climate change, especially urban climate change resilience, because that is also causing a lot of, diseases and, recurrence. And, in places like Mumbai, you are having all year dengue problem, and you are having, leptospirosis and various other health problems. So I would, stop at this stage and say that even though the urban sector says that they have got 82,575 crores for 24-25, as against 76,431 crores of the previous financial year, I would say the policy is not good enough, and it is not really giving the kind of emphasis that needs to be done at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shyamala ji. Let's move on to the last panel. No, Bhaveen ji is also joined, so we'll get to her. But Himanshu, please go ahead. I'm not sure what your focus will be, but I'm sure it'll be interesting. Go ahead.
Himanshu sir, please unmute. Himanshu sir. Yeah.
I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm traveling, so I'll be just putting my video off so that I can concentrate more on what I wish to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, sir. So basically, I am senior editor in NDTV, and I had the privilege to first report on the budget and then did two interviews with finance secretary and revenue secretary, and many of the issues that has been raised by fellow panelists. These are issues that are now being debated. If you just look at the budget, the word environment figures 6 times in finance minister's speech, but twice in the context of business and job environment. So technically environment word she uses only 4 times, and the word climate figures 7 places in her speech. And the concern that has been raised that there is not much focus or emphasis, or even the allocation is not what was expected, has some factual basis. But if you just look at the numbers, there seems to be a modest increase in the budget for the Environment Ministry per se. And I was looking at the numbers, it's around 8.51%. The budgetary allocation in 2023-24 budget was 3,079 crore. And this year, the allocation is 3,330.37 crore. So it's around 8.51% increase in terms of allocation, but revised estimates, of course, are a little higher for the financial year 2023-24. And this, again, we can expect 2024-25 to be higher as well. Now, if you look at the institutions, especially related with wildlife and pollution control, these institutions have got more budget. The National Tiger Conservation Authority budget has been increased from around 15 crore to 35 crores.
Himanshuji, sorry to interrupt, but some of these aspects actually on conservation and climate have already been dealt with by panelists. I think because you joined late, you wouldn't have heard them. So if you could go beyond the climate and conservation aspects, please. Climate conservation and water, sanitation, health have been dealt with. So other aspects, please.
Well, so then I focus, I think the climate resilient agriculture is also a subject that has been mentioned. I think so. So
that has also been, Gopalika has dealt with that.
I will focus on solar energy. Now, this is, I think, also partially been mentioned in the by one of the speakers. But FM, in fact, when she's talking about energy transition being critical for the fight against climate change, she talks about giving concessions basically to capital goods, which are important for just a minute, for manufacture of solar cells and panels, and they have been exempted from customs duty. Now, in view of sufficient domestic manufacturing capacity of solar glass and time and tin copper interconnect, she has also proposed not to extend the exemption of custom duties provided to them. So there are similar customs duty exemptions that she has announced in her budget speech. Then she has also talked about a good response to PM Surya Muft Bijli Yojana, and she has said that more than 1.28 crore people have already registered under this scheme, and this is of course expected to help address a lot of concerns on the climate change front. Then on flood mitigation, she has talked about construction of new barrages, especially in Nepal. As you know, Bihar has suffered during every monsoon season or because of the overflow of rivers from Nepal to many districts of Bihar. So she has allocated around 11,500 crores for flood mitigation and irrigation projects, and also to discourage the import of PVC flex, just a minute, banners, PVC flex banners. She has increased the basic customs duty from 10 to 25%, saying that these are non-biodegradable and hazardous for environment. She's also talked about pumped storage policy, and energy security is a point that has already been mentioned by my fellow speakers. And of course, there are few other basic customs duty exemptions to different solar power projects. So this is largely, but I think importantly, there are two things lastly that I wish to mention. One, of course, she says that we'll come out with a policy document on appropriate energy transition pathways that balances the imperatives of employment growth and environmental sustainability. And at one point, she also says that government will develop a taxonomy for climate finances for enhancing the availability of capital for climate adaptation and mitigation. So lots of promises have also been made in terms of new policy imperatives that are likely to get government's attention. I think we should wait for her to unveil some of the new policy announcements that the government is now planning to make. Thank you very much, Ashish sir.
Thank you, Himanshu. I'm sorry to interrupt you in the middle. I will have one or two questions for you once we finish. I think Bhaveenji has joined us. Yes, so Bhaveenji, please go ahead. You are the last panelist.
Really
I
sorry
don't know if you were
about-
there when I requested that 5 to 6
Yeah,
minutes, please.
We lost power, and I just had to kind of just arrange a little light, etc. So I ran
That's
into that.
okay. Can you switch
So
off
I'm
your
still-
video because your
I'm
internet
sure.
seems to be
Sorry.
weak. Yeah.
So now mostly everything has been said, and it's very well put up. So I'm just going to quickly just put one or two critiques that I'd like to add to all the co-panelists, and I truly appreciate this discussion, and as always, IMPRI bringing in some very interesting and important discussions. So considering that we are mothers who are working in clean air. So I will stress on that, of course, there's an allocation of 850 crores, which is a 100 crore increase from previous year. But whether, do we really think that's a stronger commitment to improving air quality? So something like Devo said, I wish that money and budgets could, define that. We have not been able to use the budgets that we had last year. So if this is just a way of like giving a lollipop, then that's what it more seems like that, because more than the budgets here, it's the intent, and truly in every respect in different states and in their own respective regions, their priorities, whether it's from infrastructures to every source of emissions, those are the things that need to be worked on, unlike gadgets and various spending money on these smog tower kind of solutions, and that is why we are in the kind of a mess that we are. And and of course, as parents and mothers, we I want to add to all the terms that have been said, that how many times climate, etc. So there was no mention of children or children's welfare or nutrition or social security or even maternity entitlements, and all these are very clearly now connected to clean air, and there are many studies, etc., that are being shown. So, and of course, there's been a denial recently in the parliament as well, that yet once again, every year they say that that air pollution and deaths are not connected. So first of all, they have to start connecting air, clean air and health, together, instead of, trying to portray it as an environment issue and MOEFCC giving all these directives. It should be the health ministry. So just quickly coming to certain things like the of course the lack of flood mitigation schemes. They are very limited to some states. They're favored unreasonably. It should be for more, because we see that in our chapters where really the families are really suffering, and I wish we all wish that they had more. They had kind of seen them too in the southern India, etc. Then there on the plastics, the custom duty which has been added to curb the import. Of course, it's a forthcoming step, but we are not doing anything to review the manufacturing of the single-use plastics, and especially the banned, those banned 21 items. They are still available, and many studies, etc., through many of us, as well as Toxic Links, etc., have shown very clearly that they're still available in states. So it's been 2.5 years, and there should be no reason. So again, a budget and cutting something in import duty, but then everything is available here. So it's quite, useless in that sense. Then, like the sewage treatment projects, my co-panelist was, stressing on that, and very much needed. It's only the 100 towns that are covered. That's just simply ridiculous, because as of now, everybody's seeing now how terribly the various towns and cities are, affected by that, and it should be it should have been spread to more cities and states.
And I'm not going to come to the energy because a lot of everybody's actually, spoken very well, and a lot of good things even I've learned. Of course, something that I just conclude with is that, PM Modi in COP26, he, talked about the net zero target by 2050. And this, if we are even aiming at 2050 and aiming at this kind of a net zero target, we need a financial requirement of about $600 billion annually and for 30 years. So let's not fall in this trap of these, small bits coming in, and we got to just think bigger now, because there is just no way. Climate crisis is here. We are seeing it now in every way, and even our forest conservation policy, everything will need to be prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhavreen. Just a quick correction, which Soumya has also put. The net zero target for India is 2070. So it's 20 years more than what you're saying, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be on target anyway. There's so many questions with relation to the net zero. Many different questions that we have. Okay, I'm going to thank you all the panelists for some really very incisive comments on the budget, both the problems and the prospects. I'm going to do a round of questions and request you to maybe respond in a minute or so, each of you. So Devadatta is gone, so my question to him will remain, but maybe I'll make a comment on that later. Krishna Raj,
yeah, sir, I am here. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So, yeah, so I think if you kind of look at, you would have seen the economic survey and how much of huge two chapters actually on climate there are. But as you actually mentioned, that doesn't necessarily reflect in the actual budgetary allocations. But do you have any comments on the chapters in the economic survey? I found that the last chapter, which I don't know who has written, is very interesting, because it talks about a more Indian way of looking at the climate crisis. Some of the language there sounded very interesting, but of course there's no reflection of that in the budget. Do you have any additional comments on that?
Yeah, that is. I just want to comment on two issues. One is that they always speak about lifestyle changes for environment. So in order to achieve that lifestyle changes for environment, I was also part of this lifestyle changes for environment. That was an international seminar took place in New Delhi. There changes in the lifestyles may not be for actually the poor people. If you look at the poor people, their lifestyles are always aligned with nature, and they consume minimum goods and services, and they live very close to nature, and most of their habits and consumption production habits, including agriculture, they're incommensurate or in align with the nature. But the lifestyle changes should be in the urban areas, not in the rural areas. Of course, in rural areas also influenced by urban sector, but most importantly, lifestyle changes are in urban area needs to be urban areas. But the promotion of economic growth in urban areas, particularly the consumerism aspects, the government is not seriously thinking about the consumerism and growth of this mall culture, and whatever they want they can consume and destroy the environment. These type of ecological footprints, they are really affecting the not only production but also it is creating more of an environment where everyone wants to follow the Western type of culture or modern type of culture, or the urban type of lifestyles. Where the behavioral changes, especially in production and consumption, it is not coming forward by the government in terms of policy action. if you look at the energy transition policies, it is just a business for the corporates or industries rather than protecting the environment. They do not have any honest or sincere effort to conserve the environment. Just transition is another business for corporates.
Yeah.
So therefore, electric
another profit making. So
profit making, yes, out of nature.
Yeah.
That is it. If you look
Sure.
at the rare,
Okay, thanks. So,
yeah.
sorry, we're gonna have to go ahead because we still have 7 other people to ask questions to, and then the
Correct.
audience already has some 7 questions. So, but
Yeah, yeah.
at the end, we'll all get a chance to do some rounding remarks. Thanks for that, Krishna Raj. So it seems like life. I mean, our Prime Minister is very fond of creating new acronyms, and life was another one which came up a few years back. But whether it actually means something on the ground is a big question mark. Soumya, if you can hear me.
Yes.
So one of the things you mentioned is that there's a significant increase in dependence on the private sector for coal, which is why the Ministry of Coal's allocations are going down. That's an interesting comment. But it's the same also with renewable energy, right? So we see a huge amount of focus on allocating lands, grabbing them from communities and allocating lands to the private sector for mega solar and mega wind. Would you like to comment on that? And also, of course, this is linked to the previous comment that Krishna Raj made.
See, obviously, both in the coal and coal sector as well as in the renewable energy sector, the focus is more on private industries setting up. But in the renewable energy sector, even though there is no direct subsidy involved as of now, there are a lot of, also in the coal sector, but in the renewable energy sector, there are a lot of hidden subsidies that is involved, including one on land. Then one of the speakers also mentioned storage. Then that is, storage is an essential component of a transition to renewable energy. By the way, let me just comment on this, that a lot of people, we are talking about a transition, India has a transition plan. No transition is taking place as of now. As of now, India's energy policy is all of the above, from coal to nuclear to hydro to renewable to everything. Even if you have something from the space, you'll also have that. So it's basically no transition is happening, because transition happens when one form is being replaced, at least getting started to replace by another form. We transition from horse-drawn carriage to railways and then to mostly to roadways. We transition from gas lighting to electric lighting. So none of this is happening in India, at least. In most countries, it is not happening. In India, it's not happening. So let us clear that we are nowhere doing any transition. We are adding different kinds. But in the renewable energy sector, there is, in spite of the emphasis on private sector companies setting up new plants, there is still a large sector where rooftops, farmers, small households, so the Surya Ghar Yojana. So there is a whole area, not new, whole area where the government subsidies, funding, budgetary support is needed. And that is where at least some of this is going into, like this Surya Ghar Yojana, 1 crore households will have their own solar energy. So many solar powered pump sets will be needed. So all these require government support. Whereas for coal or oil, you don't have those kind of things. You have either a large state sector, public sector, or a large private sector. So those kind of subsidies is still, it's no longer needed and not directly implemented. In the solar renewable sector, not only solar, but wind also, but solar being the primary now, wind picked up earlier, solar is picking up more now. So those kind of things need government support. And that's where many of these will be going, hopefully.
Right, thanks. And of course, we have the additional, in a way, subsidy that these so-called renewable energy projects don't need environmental impact assessment and clearance, which is actually a huge subsidy in many ways. Thanks, Soumya. Gopalika, quick 2 questions for you. One is that you
Ashish,
mentioned about
Gopalaji is not here.
Oh, she's gone?
She's gone, yeah.
Okay, all right. So, okay, then over to Shyamala. So I think, I mean, you pointed out various problems with regard to water sanitation and health. One of the issues I have seen on the ground, for instance, is also that there's whatever budgets are allocated, there's a very uniform approach. So, for instance, in Ladakh, the water mission ends up laying, pipelines and taps and all of that, which freeze in winter and crack, which the local people told them that's what would happen, but it was ignored because these experts flew in from New Delhi and said, no, we know what to do. And this is, of course, a problem all across the country. So do you feel that there's anything in the budget or in policies which kind of understands this and begins to change it?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The regional approach is definitely missing. I would only say that the only thing which I saw positive in terms of some of the water approaches was the funds which have been allocated for disasters in those particularly 5 states which they have mentioned: Assam, Bihar, Sikkim, Himachal, and Uttarakhand. But there also, I'm not sure. Of course, they have particularly mentioned Bihar because the Kosi Mechi link and about how they are trying to do this accelerated irrigation benefit program in Nepal. I don't know whether that is being able to go forward. But it shows a little bit that okay, they are looking at some of the local issues and especially from the health point also I can say that it is the non-communicable diseases are also a very big issue, and that has although there's not been a great fund allocation, but at least it has got some amount of mention, which we are also working on. So I wouldn't say that there is a very localized approach, but we are just hoping, like for instance, one of the things that in the health sector that we are all concerned about is what is known as co-benefits. So for instance, they have just mentioned 5,000 CBG plants, along with nuclear and solar, and it is just like they also ran type of thing. But actually CBG, if it is linked with methane mitigation, capture, and you localize it, you actually make it in such a way that you can have smaller CBG, larger ones, and it is not necessarily always bankable, but it is definitely a co-benefit because you are reducing pollution, you are reducing methane, which is so mitigation also, and at the same time it is also giving you better transport fuel. You are getting also PNG. They have mentioned PNG, of course, which is piped natural gas and things like that. So one can only hope that somehow this is will be localized, and some of the state governments will try to utilize this kind of a benefit. One has to hope for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Shyamala. So finally, I think for Himanshu and then a quick one for Bhavdeen also. So Himanshu, you mentioned that there is some emphasis on flood damage control with barrages in Nepal. We have, I think, at least one participant from Nepal. I'm wondering what he thinks about that. One is, of course, in terms of the impacts on the ground that barrages have, but secondly, also, do we not have enough evidence now that these big infrastructural ways of trying to control floods, such as in Kosi, have really failed? So does it not actually end up becoming yet another profit-making exercise for some companies? Or do you think that these sorts of barrages will actually help with flood damage control? Himanshu, if you're trying to speak, you're on mute. Himanshu, could you hear me?
Sir, he had to be at airport. I will check with him on WhatsApp.
Okay, all right. So let me finish with Bhavdeen, and then we can get to some of the questions the audience has asked. So Bhavdeen, I think you made some very important points about air pollution. Maybe there is some higher allocation, but there's little proof that money is actually going to where it should be going. And you mentioned children, and I think that's a very, very important focus. Now, in the National Air Action Plan, is there any focus, not in the budgets, of course, but even in the action plan, on the most vulnerable people, those who are most vulnerable to air pollution, including children, as you mentioned, or those who are in the streets, like the 30-40 crore that Soumya mentioned? Is there anything there? And then accordingly, would there be anything in the budget allocation that would go in that direction?
Not really. I mean, it's a very valid, question that you asked, and somehow, but it really doesn't. I think National Cleanup Plan is a very, it's a very, like a Babu plan, which is a very, legit. It looks on paper and extremely focused on specifics. It could be whether it's the various, emissions, various, whether it's construction or it's vehicular, or so it's very policy based, and there is no feel of that's why it's so important. Even with the doctors now, recently we've been trying to, when you work with Doctors for Clean Air, etc., we are trying to tell them to humanize all this. We have to humanize the data, and that is why it needs that whatever is being said about clean air, whatever we are saying about the children, or ever say in Delhi every third child has damaged lungs, that needs to be translated into a reality, which will come only when they prescribe, when they say that this, okay, you have this cold, continuous cold for 2 weeks, or a cough, it is related to air pollution. Or if you can't say that, you say that you need to go to a neighboring city, town, which is AQI 60. So that is what is the change is going to happen, and that is exactly what you asked, is that is missing. That emotion is missing for the National Clean Air Plan, or the people, or the ministers. It's very, very easy for them to say, even in spite of these hundreds of studies, the recent Lancet study saying that we have so and so number of people are dying every day of air pollution. So if nobody will believe this, the government is never going to come in this trap until it's proven to them. And I'm sure a lot of people here know about this case from London, where a mother is fighting for this 9-year-old daughter who died of asthma. And that's the first case in the whole world where the reason of death is air pollution. But besides that, there is no other case. And India also has no case where we've admitted that the person has died of air pollution, in spite of so much connection and data and studies. So yes, that's very
Thank
much.
you. Yeah, thanks. This reminds me of the 70s or 80s, where the tobacco companies were all completely denying any possibility of smoking killing people. They finally had to admit it when there was so much evidence. So I guess we just have to keep at it and keep producing that evidence, and not just air pollution, but also climate-related deaths, and create more and more evidence for that. Soumya, I know you raised your hand, but I'm going to, and you can respond to this collectively, because there's a question from Bamdev Sigdal, who's from Nepal, talking about maybe the need for collective efforts on mitigating CO2 emission and the use of renewable resources. And I think he mentions water in particular, abundant water resources, across South Asia, maybe through SAARC. So maybe if you can respond to that also, and any other comment you had, because you raised your hand. Soumya, go ahead. Soumya, are you speaking? You're on mute.
As far as I know, the maximum focus on the National Clean Air Mission, the action plan, is on monitoring, increasing the monitoring, because there are very few cities which have across the city monitoring stations, and these monitoring stations are very costly. Online real-time monitoring stations cost crores. So that is one of the major focus. The second is there is absolutely no focus on, as you said, the vulnerable population, because it was repeatedly pointed out, not from today, last 20 years plus, that two of the major things that contribute to air pollution in urban areas, one is fuel burning. And the cars are the major, particularly diesel cars. This has also been pointed out that if you just stop the diesel burning in the cities, just switch on to petrol cars. A diesel car of equivalent capacity emits 7 to 8 times as much air pollutant, particulate pollutants, as a petrol car also. So there is absolutely no focus on vulnerable sections, those who have to work outside. So the second point that you just mentioned, that in the South Asian context, whether we can do it. In fact, if you go back to the SARC days, the last was the Nepal Kathmandu SARC, I think 2014. After that, because of Indian Pakistan, the SARC process got stalled and India diverted from SARC to BIMSTEC. So that's a new and focus, look east, act east, focus east kind of thing. But within SARC, we had two important, one is called a statement, one is called a declaration. There is possibly a Thimphu declaration and a Dhaka statement. And both of these pointed to, in the SARC framework, when the SARC meetings were taking place, both of them pointed to concrete action by the 7 members, 8 members, including Afghanistan at the time, of the SARC nations, including there was this SARC food bank. In times of climate emergency, food crisis in one country, there was a proposal and Bangladesh was supposed to be the site for the SARC food bank. All of this got washed out in this stalling of the SARC and India going into the other direction, and now focus is on opening up. So that's my other comment. But last point, water resources, as all of us know, it's a little tricky because water is a resource, but water is also for a resource for a nature. And if you have to tap large amounts of energy from flowing waters, then there are multiple other issues that we have been facing, not even from Narmada, even before that. So that's all.
Thanks, Soumya. This also relates to the question I had for Himanshu, but he's not there, with regard to the proposed barrages in Nepal and their possible impacts. Okay, so I think a number of the people with questions have been promoted as panelists, so you could actually open your mic and ask yourself. So Bandana, would you like to ask your question yourself? If you open your mic.
Yes, sir.
Bandana,
Just
yes, go.
want to hear about this taxonomy on climate finance.
Okay, thanks. Who can respond to that? Who has looked at this taxonomy? We only have now Krishna Raj, Soumya, Bhavreen, and Shyamala still with us. Krishna Raj, have you looked at this?
Actually, the term, it is not well defined by the finance minister, even though he has mentioned in the budget. So taxonomy of the climate budget certainly have a separate climate budget along with the main budget. So in Karnataka, we are also requesting the government of Karnataka to have a separate climate budget for mitigation and adaptation. And if you look at the budget, there is no separate budget for climate policy.
Okay, thank you.
May
So I guess
respond?
we'll have to wait and see. Soumya, go ahead.
See, this was called taxonomy of climate finance in that sense. And India has been focusing on 3 aspects on climate finance. India is not really looking out for the GCF funding too much, though India has received 4 or 5 GCF projects, the Green Climate Fund projects. One of the primary areas of India's climate finance is on mitigation. And those are going to large amounts, billions of dollars are going to renewable energy projects. The second part of taxonomy of climate finance that India is focusing on, India held several meetings on getting climate finance readiness, and they are looking at this sequestration budget, that they will sequester so much in terms of that, and that will be compensated in so many million tons of carbon sequestered, that will be compensated for in terms of money by countries which have a clear target. So these 3 areas have been looked at. Apart from, as I said, India is also receiving money from GCF, small amount of money from adaptation fund, very small amount. So those are not major.
Yeah, that's what I
Thanks,
wanted
Soumya.
to make it. Therefore, what I was telling is that the climate budget mainly is coming from public public or government, but most of the sectors who are in the private, they are polluting the environment. They are not taking the responsibility, even CSR fund. And even though India is expecting $1 billion US for the climate action plan from global finances, private and both public, but that is also not forthcoming. So given these challenges, the most of the funds are going for mitigation, especially energy sector, and adaptation is receiving a raw deal. So therefore, taxonomy of climate finance is certainly not in the right direction, which is moving. But in India, it is the public finance which has to be placed high priority in mitigation and adaptation. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Krishna and Soumya. And when you mentioned sequestration, Soumya, and of course related to carbon markets, which are also coming in, have already come in a big way. We know
Could
that,
I speak?
of course, there's all kinds of. Just a second, Bamdeji. So we know that a lot of that is also going into problematic areas like plantations on people's lands or on pastoral lands and wildlife lands, and then of course showing those plantations as being increase in forest cover. So there's a lot of golmaal going on there also. Bamdeji, you wanted to add something to your question? Please go ahead, but
Yes,
quickly,
sir.
please. We still have
So,
5-6 more questions. Yeah.
our motto, our mutual, work would be, very challenging, and we have to work collectively on a climate change drive, either trilaterally or bilaterally, India, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, or even Maldives. We can have a kind of sharing, best practices, and advocacy and action, and it needs a huge amount, as one of the experts he already mentioned how much billion, and the allocation seems to be very poor, only 0.4% for environment, in your union budget. I think it is similar in the context of Nepal too, and there is a dire need of joint effort, at people level, at local level, at regional level, and even within the SARC, we need to have mutual consensus, to move ahead
Yes, thank you.
when we talk of environment and development, or whether when we talk of environment and sustainable development goal, or when we talk of use of renewable energy for the betterment of the mass people of South Asian region, in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your inputs. There are a number of people's initiatives at trying to create a South Asia forum, and if you're interested, we can put you in touch with some of them,
Thank you.
which are probably more promising than what governments are doing or not doing. Okay, so let me go to Swasthai. Swasthai, you can open your mic. The question on nuclear energy is what I also wanted to ask Gopalika with regard to all the problematic aspects of nuclear, but she's not there. So maybe you can go to your second question.
Yeah, Gopalika is not there. So I'm wondering whether we should. Maybe you can just read out the question, Ashish.
I can respond.
Yeah, nuclear, I mean, there's a lot of things one can say about that, but go ahead, Swasthai, if you want, ask both the questions.
No, just because
Soumya respond to one, and the second one,
Gopalika was mentioning about nuclear. I just wanted to assert that nuclear is no way safe, and it's even more dangerous than coal because it affects the generations to come. So let us all agree to insist that nuclear should never be included in any of the alternative or safe options. Thank you.
You want your second question?
I don't remember
the
that.
Heat wave. So you say, is there any mention of the budget?
Yeah, I
budget
also wanted
providing...
to ask whether in any of the panelists, whether they have come across any mention about treatments of the heat wave affected people or any of the climate victims, because as I learned from our health group friends, there is no special budget assigned to increase any of the facilities because these will be provided mostly from the public health system. So I'm wondering whether we should think about that.
Yes, thanks. There are, I think Soumya will have something to say on both, but I've read some of the city heat action plans like the one on Ahmedabad, and they too talk about training medical personnel to be available and having possibilities of people who are impacted. But then whether it's actually happening on the ground is a big question. And of course, most cities or other areas do not even have action plans as of now. Soumya, quickly on this heat wave thing.
On the heat wave.
Anything you want to add, or anybody else? Or anybody else on?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So basically, as you said, there are heat action plans done by many states and many cities, but also some states like Telangana have done their plan, the state action plan on heat wave and climate like that. So heat waves particularly, lot of cities and some states are taking cognition of. But the problem is the major impact is not just by the temperature. And there is a major problem because when you know when there is a heat wave, when the IMD by its own yardstick declares that in the plains 40 degree, in the hills 30 degree, in the coastal areas 30 degree, and then 4.5 degree above that for 2 days. But these are actually the temperature, and the most important is combination of high temperature and high humidity, which is called heat index or the wet bulb temperature. That's actually the killer combination. IMD do not issue even warnings for that. If you go deep into the IMD site, you will find what is the humidity, what is the big thing. But heat index is not given as a warning. And also the second most important factor, where these crores of people, working people work, whether in cities or in urban, in rural areas, these temperatures, humidities are actually not given by the IMD weather station, IMD meteorological station. Because in a city, most cities, IMD has 1 or 2 stations. Whereas there are 100 different places where, because of urban heat island effect, because of less ventilation, the conditions are far worse. So I think that has not even been recognized, that most people face this condition, where IMD has not yet declared a heat wave by its own criteria. So those needs a complete relook.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that.
Ashish, I would like to add one point.
Remember, yeah, Krishna, please go ahead.
Yeah, but these heat waves are very frequent and also very severe in various parts of the country. So I had suggested in one of my article in the Tribune, so the heat wave should be considered under natural disaster management. It is also one of the serious natural disaster. So under this act, it should be brought in, and compensation and other rehabilitation has to be taken place in case of excess heat waves in various parts of the country. That was my suggestion.
Thank you. And maybe we should be renaming that act as natural and human caused disasters. Most of these are human caused. But thanks for that. I was just going to say that this reminds me of in case any of you has read that, and if not, you should, science fiction book called Ministry for the Future, the first chapter of which is about wet bulb temperatures in Uttar Pradesh killing about 20 million people. Now, that might seem like science fiction, but it may not be too far off if you looked at the sorts of temperatures and humidity that we had this year already. So that's a very important point that Soumya has brought up. Okay, we have a question from Devashish. Devashish, would you like to ask it yourself, please? 2 questions.
Yeah, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Actually, I was thinking that why we are looking into the symptomatic treatment of everything, because the way we have gone with environmental impact assessment, we have seen that the teeth that was earlier available is no more there. So I think there is an incentive from the CAG of India in the International Center for Environment Audit in Jaipur, where I take classes for the officers of the Indian Audit and Account Services. they are giving a lot of emphasis on environmental audit, in which a small part is EIA. So if we legalize environmental audit, especially for the extractive industries or the industries which we think are the dirty industries, then that can give a lot of strength to our environmental legislation. And number two, I was also interested what was happening in Denmark long back. That is the deposit refund system. Or if you remember, when we were kids, we were bringing glass bottles of gold spot and all that into our home, and depositing a particular fund for bringing that. And when we used to return it, we used to get back that deposit. So I think these are some of the small efforts. One is the environmental audit, another is the DRS, which will do away with the plastic bottles maybe in the near future in 5 to 10 years. What's your opinion, especially the experts on the panel regarding this? I teach economics in a small rural government college in Assam.
Thank you, Devashish. Both important points. Would anybody like to respond to these? Shyamala ji, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think, yes, we have definitely been recommending, the deposit scheme and also reduction of plastics. I definitely agree with Dr. Bose on that aspect. And the other point, I forget, was it about...
on environmental audits.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that, we were talking about environmental audit. We were also talking about, climate action plans and heat islands. So definitely environmental audits of any sector within the environment, including waste management or air pollution or water, it definitely helps, and in in whatever way it strengthens the ability of the local bodies to respond to it. And I would also like to say that especially for environmental audits, the fact that today the urban local bodies are not strengthened, and we have not been able to implement the 74th Amendment in its true spirit, especially, having the Mohalla committees and, strengthening the RWAs and things like that. That is something that will really help if you want to do environmental audits. Because like Ashish, you pointed out earlier, one needs to be localized. It cannot be that, somebody else does an environmental audit and you try to do the implementation. So I would say that that aspect, all of us really need to get together and say that along with rural bodies strengthening, it's the urban local bodies and especially the citizens' action that is very, very important, and that will really help in both these aspects Ms. Dr. Bose brought up. Thanks.
Thank you, Shyamala. I think that's a very crucial point you made about governance. We claim to be the world's largest democracy, but if you look at on the ground, democratic rights and powers are actually still very, very limited, despite the constitutional amendments and the spirit of the Constitution. So this is an absolutely important point for all sectors, including, of course, the environment. On environmental audits, I also just wanted to quickly add that I think for last 20, 30 years, many of us have been asking for not just the impact assessments of specific projects, but of sectors as a whole. So when the energy sector, for instance, is it's designed or devised, or when a policy is brought out on energy or any of the other sectors, that itself needs to go through an environmental impact assessment and audit, so that it's not just these specific individual projects where it becomes very easy to hide the cumulative impacts of all the projects put together. But that, of course, is a demand that's never been acknowledged or met. Okay, so does any of the other panelists want to add anything more on any of this? We have about 8 minutes left. So your closing remarks. Krishna, you want to start? So in the same order, Krishna, then Soumya, then I think if Bhavreen is still here, and then, oh, sorry, there's a hand up by Tulasi Birunda. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Please go ahead. You have a question?
Sir.
Yes. Go ahead.
Not a question like that. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead.
So it's not a question like that. So for the past several years, the budget allocation is not fully utilized. So whatever the budget is allocated for the Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change, they have not fully utilized. So there is no monitoring of that. The reasons were not identified, and that is not reflected in the pre-budget survey also. Why they have not utilized? What are the reasons behind that? What are the hurdles and the drawbacks for that? So here allocation alone, the rupees that is allocated, the productivity should be assessed, that it is not made. And the second point is, we are discussing about the panel discussion budget, after budget. So if we could have discussed earlier, pre-budget. So before the announcement of the budget, if we were, the panelists, environmental experts, we could have discussed about what are the problems pertaining in India about the environment, climate change and all. What are the actions so far made? So if you have made an assessment of that, that is just like environmental audit. If you have made some kind of things, and if you could, we can able to suggest some of the points to the government. So these are all the
Thank
2
you.
points I would like.
Thank you. Both important points. Maybe IMPRI can think of doing a pre-budget discussion like this, and then of course also a post-budget one. Though of course many people in over many years have made all kinds of suggestions with facts and evidence to the government about how environmental budget should be increased or the different kinds of things that allocations, but they've mostly been met with deaf ears. But nevertheless, I think a public discussion pre and post would be an interesting exercise. So thanks for those comments. Krishna, over to you. A minute, please.
Yeah, as Brinda mentioned, the budgets really does not reflect what is the actually spent amount in the last year, previous year. That is a big issue, needs to be considered by the economic survey. At least they should have honesty to accept how much money has been allocated and how much money budget has been spent on the sector, and what is the outcome. Is the outcome budget is more important than what is allocated. And I was mentioning another point is that most of the budget here, they are not going for capital investment. They are going for revenue revenue expenditure. That means that most of these expenditure for paying salary and other expenditure. So that does not make any impact on the climate also. So these aspects needs to be considered. They need to separate out for this budget. What is the revenue expenditure, how much it's go for, and how much it's going for afforestation, for example, and national afforestation program and green mission, etc. So that would help us to understand whether government is really doing a good job to increase the forest cover or not.
Thank you. Thank you. Soumya, any closing remarks?
Yes. I think one of the major problems of not only this government, it was even earlier, but this government has accelerated this, of grading the environmental issues down in action. While talking not about this with acronyms and others, is that the focus on economic aspects, just the macroeconomic aspects, is very high. And even the economic aspects of people are neglected. So one of the major stumbling blocks that if we want to do something about this, we need to bring out, I don't know how, I have no ready-made answer, but we need to bring out how a degraded environment actually hits the economy. If you look at even the, which we don't like very much, No Lab Lost, ADB, World Bank, they have been showing that because of our degrading environmental condition, India is going to lose between 6 to 7% of its GDP by 2070 to 2080 in that period. So, and we are already losing around 1.8 to 1.9, almost 2% of our GDP because of the environmental impacts, including climate impacts. So if we can bring those out very clearly to these partially blind and blinder oriented people who are acting like ostriches about the problems, then probably the Ministry of Environment and Environmental Action will get, probably, I'm not sure, will get a little more attention looking at from the economic point of view. Because with these heavyweight ministries, coal, energy, oil, all of this, if you look at the budget and look at the action, Environment Ministry is a negligible part. And that has always been treated like that.
Absolutely. And Soumya, yeah, absolutely right. Actually, more than 10 years back, the World Bank already showed that in those years, I'm talking about 2012, I think, or 11, we were losing 5.7% of GDP because of just 5 environmental damaging causes. That so it's not only in the future, it's already happening. Bhavreen, any concluding remarks?
Not really. I mean, everything was, also like enjoying. I just want to say that, again, we should not really get into this trap of environmental sustainability, agricultural resilience. Those kind of terms are very, very nice to hear, but they really don't mean anything, because if you're talking of agricultural resilience, you're trying to give budgets, but then again, we're again asking for focus on crops for support, for the farmers, for like pulses and oil seeds and MSPs, and it's not happening. Or you're talking of sewerage and treatment projects, and the STPs are not coming, because we know, like today we exposed a story again, which isn't happening with the denims. The court has given orders, the plants have to get shut, but they insist, the DPCC, they've done it. But yeah, in spite of that, we took a drone image to show the complete, the terraces are full of denims and work is happening. So this is all, when it comes to the ground, is very, very frustrating, and it'll all end up the same way. I mean, everything is connected, everything from infrastructure to, clean air to climate crisis. Everything is there. I mean, there is no way that you can escape any disasters by not even having one. So I guess we must be critical of ourselves. Yeah. Thank you, Jit.
Thanks. Thanks, Bhavreen. I think maybe at the beginning I should have said that any discussion on budgets is within a very limited framework, where we're trying to see if we can make the government more accountable. That doesn't necessarily address the fundamental aspects, root causes of the issues, including what Soumya was saying, the kind of emphasis we have on a profit-making capitalist economy and the centralization of powers in the state and so on. So those are much more fundamental issues. We were not getting into them. So this is within a limited framework. So your point is absolutely valid. Shyamala, any
just
concluding?
30 seconds. I wanted to say that, they have increased some few percentages for health sector. Whereas, the environmental health issues are really huge. We were talking about loss of economic benefits. Basically, the DALIs, what they know is the disability adjusted life years, because of climate change issues and because of environmental damage, is so high. It's not just only productivity, the kind of health issues that rise because of that. It's not only infectious diseases, but also non-communicable diseases and, chronic diseases, which are a very big issue. And we find that the primary health sector, which is where, the first level of where the environmental, impacted people go to, it is very, very poor, and this budget has absolutely no mention of that at all. So this is something that really needs to be looked into, and environmental health budget has to be mentioned. That's one part of resilience.
Thanks, Shyamala. And I think this links also to what Bhavreen was saying about very little focus on children, and then I expanded that to other vulnerable populations, and it's all interlinked. So if you have junk food that people are eating because it's cheaper than proper healthy food, that makes all of us much more vulnerable to environmental hazards and pollution and things like that, and other sorts of impacts. And of course, the poor are the ones who suffer the most because of all of this. So even linking, say, agriculture, environment, health and education, which is crucial. That kind of interlinking, of course, one does not see in the governments or in the planning and policies and in the budgets. So thank you for that. There's Prudhvi has a question in the chat. We are, I think, out of time, so maybe it's on per capita waste management, etc. So Shyamala, if you have some figures, maybe you can just answer her in the Q&A. And Suhastai has important question. I was also going to ask this, that right now the budget session is going on in Parliament, and we have in fact been asked if we have questions that could be put to members of Parliament to ask. So if any of you thinks that any of the points that we came up today in the last couple of hours is worth asking as a Parliament question, please get in touch with me, and I will direct you to this group Madhyam, who is able to put it across to members of Parliament so that they can ask in the Parliament. So please do get back to me on that with Suhastai's suggestion. All right. For the moment, that's it from me. Back to IMPRI for any closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you to all the esteemed panelists. As we come to an end of today's discussion, I, Remat, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of #IMPRI, Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development. I would like to thank all of you for attending today's deliberation, a panel discussion on the Environment and Union Budget 2024 to 25. As a part of IMPRI's 5th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget 2024-25. We are grateful to our chair for the session, Mr. Ashish Kothari ji, our esteemed panelists, Professor Krishna Raj ji, Mr. Soumya Datta ji, Professor Shyamala Mani ji, Mr. Deboditya Sinha ji, Ms. Bhavreen Kandhari ji, Ms. Aparna Roy ji, Ms. Pratna Bora ji, Ms. Gopalika Arora ji, and Mr. Himanshu Shekhar ji for taking part in the discussion and enlightening us. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We're grateful if you're watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join into our future IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good